are living in the midst of a great social revolution, and I'm proud to be able to play a small part in that revolution every day. And I encourage each and every one of you to play your part too. Now, this revolution doesn't quite look like our images of revolution. It doesn't have the rebel military leaders. It doesn't have the toppled statues of fallen dictators. No, this revolution looks a little different. But it's one of the most profound revolutions in all human history. I'm talking about the women's equality revolution, the revolution by which women in large numbers, for the first time in all of human history, are reaching out and pursuing dreams and aspirations that are not defined and limited by their gender. Now, I became committed to the women's equality revolution in college. I'm the youngest of 3 sisters and the daughter of Hungarian refugee parents who believed passionately in the importance of education for their daughters. And I got into a great college, Davidson College, and I was a philosophy major and was very interested in focusing on human rights. And it was while I was in college that I started to realize how my gender shaped how people perceived me and how it shaped my world. Like the guys who told my boyfriend, "She's too smart to date." Or the fact that women's voices and perspectives were largely absent from what I was reading in the classroom. Or the pivotal moment when I was given the great honor as an undergraduate to address the board of trustees of my college. And I screwed up all my courage and I gave a speech where I challenged several college policies. And the response I got was for a trustee to walk up to me and say, "It's so nice to have a pretty girl in the board of trustees." Now, these experiences didn't only make me mad, they made me think. They made me think about gender, and my study of human rights also made me realize how women's rights were ignored and trampled all over the world. And I began to connect the dots, to connect my small experiences to something much bigger, the larger story of women around the world. And I developed a passion for educating and inspiring young women, encouraging them to aim high, to speak up. And it was that passion that ultimately led me to Agnes Scott College. Now, the founding of schools like Agnes Scott, women's colleges like Agnes Scott, is directly linked to the women's equality revolution because that revolution began in earnest in the mid-19th century with efforts to expand educational opportunities for women and with the 70-year struggle, and it was a long and hard struggle for women to achieve the right to vote, which they finally did in 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. The second chapter of the women's equality revolution started about 50 years ago, when women in large numbers started to challenge and to overcome the gender-based restrictions on their opportunities, educational, civic, professional. College students are often quite astonished these days when I tell them that just 50 years ago in this country, sexism was rampant and legally sanctioned. If you open the newspaper, the want ads were divided: help wanted men, help wanted women. In 1962, the United States Supreme Court upheld the exclusion of women from juries on the grounds that jury duty would interfere with their performance of their domestic duties. Dr. Spock, the famous parenting expert, said that it was a bad idea to encourage women and girls to be competitive because too many of them became disagreeable. And the officials who ran the Boston Marathon excluded women because it was unhealthy for women to run long distances. And of course, if you've seen Mad Men, you know that the advertising world of the 1960s was extraordinarily sexist. So 50 years ago, it would have been unimaginable for most people to think that women could be Supreme Court justices, Nobel Prize-winning scientists, marathon runners. Absolutely unimaginable. But it's happened. Today, women are on the Supreme Court. They are in elected office. They are Fortune 500 CEOs. So we have made extraordinary progress. We have come a very long way. But the revolution remains unfinished. And in fact, we have a long way to go. Deborah Rohde of Stanford University has calculated at the current rates of progress how long it would take women to achieve parity in elected office and in corporate leadership in this country. You know how long? 300 years. And as important as that measure of how far we still have to go is, we also have to remember that around the world, for millions of women, gender equality is a very distant dream, that they lead lives in which their gender robs them of opportunity, it robs them of dignity, and all too often, it robs them of physical safety and even of their lives. And that's not only true overseas. Right here in this country, right here in this city, women are abused and killed by intimate partners who cannot accept that the women in their lives are, in the words of the Chinese proverb, entitled to hold up half the sky. So as I thought about gender equality and the barriers to gender equality, I came to realize that one of the deepest of those barriers is even closer to home. It's right here. It's in our heads. It's in my head. It's in your head. It's the gender biases that affect how we perceive the world and the judgments we make about the world. Researchers have again and again demonstrated the reality of this gender bias. Let me just give you a few examples. Female musicians are 30% more likely to get a job in an orchestra if they audition behind a screen so that the jury doesn't know if they're male or female. College students rate their online instructors higher if they think those instructors are men than if they think those instructors are women. And HR directors, given identical resumes, will find candidates more competent if they think that that candidate is a man versus a woman. This is not overt sexism. This is unconscious gender bias. There's actually a great little test for gender bias. It's a little riddle. You may have heard it. Imagine a father and son who are involved in a horrible car accident. The father is killed instantly, and the son is rushed to the local hospital for emergency surgery to save his life. The chief surgeon comes in, scrubs up, is prepared to begin the surgery, and looks down and sees the boy and says, "I can't operate. That's my son." Deborah Bell of Boston University has tried out this riddle with lots of different audiences, and she finds that people come up with all kinds of reasons for how you can make sense of that riddle. Only 14% of them, 14% come up with the obvious answer, which is the surgeon is the boy's mother. That's how gender bias works. In fact, even college students whose mothers are doctors get stumped by that riddle. So that shows you how powerful this is, and it's pretty depressing, actually, when you think about it. But you know, we shouldn't be surprised, because for millennia, across civilizations, across cultures, and across religions, men have dominated. And so it's not surprising that we associate leadership and competence with a gender, and that gender is male. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible to overcome those gender biases. It just means that we have to work at it. We have to think about it. And it's going to take time and effort and the courage to think differently. I want to share a story about a moment in college when I challenged my own gender biases. I decided that I would change the way I prayed the Lord's Prayer from Our Father who art in heaven to Our Mother who art in heaven. I didn't do that because I think God is a woman rather than a man. I did it because I decided and realized, well, I think God is beyond gender. God transcends gender. And so why do I think of God as a man? And I wanted to get myself out of the habit. In fact, if you think about it, thinking of God as a man is the ultimate example of gender bias. You know, we associate divine competence with the masculine gender. Just changing that one word, just saying Our Mother who art in heaven, was profoundly liberating for me. In fact, it was revolutionary. I felt like there were statues that were toppling in my head. Now, it's not surprising that I had those experiences in college, because the single most powerful tool in the women's equality revolution is education. Both here and around the world, if you educate a woman, you not only liberate her mind, but you change her society. In fact, development economists now call it the double X solution to global poverty. So I am privileged to be a part of that revolution for women's equality every day as I work at Agnes Scott College, which for 125 years has educated women and inspired them to aim high, to think deeply, live honorably, and engage the intellectual and social challenges of their time. I'm proud of the trailblazers that have graduated from Agnes Scott, the Fortune 1000 CEOs, the state Supreme Court justices, the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwrights, and I'm proud of our young graduates who every year go out into the world with a deep and profound sense of confidence that, yes, they can be the change that they want to see in the world. But you know, when I tell people where I work, this is the most common response I get. Are you all still an all-girls school? So I've thought about the assumptions that underlie that incredibly common question. And the assumption is that there's something anachronistic about women's colleges. You know, maybe it's horse and buggy anachronistic, or at least 8-track tape anachronistic. And then the judgment that underlies that is the notion that, well, women's colleges had a reason to exist when they were the only option. They're second best. They can't possibly be a preferred option. It took me a while to figure out that judgment is a classic case of gender bias, because the evidence points in the opposite direction. Women's colleges represent a very small percentage of college students across the country, but we are disproportionately represented, our graduates are disproportionately represented among leaders. 30% of Business Week's 50 women who are rising stars in corporate America, 30% women's college graduates. 20% of Black Enterprise Magazine's most powerful African American women in America, women's college graduates. Fully a third of the women who serve on the boards of directors of Fortune 1000 companies are women's college graduates. Overall, our graduates tell us that they are inspired by college to aim high and to lead. So women's colleges are not anachronistic. In fact, we are in the vanguard of the women's equality revolution, because we immerse young women at this incredibly important time in their lives in an environment that says to them, you matter, you're worth it, you're smart, and you're going places. I experience this all the time. I remember a dad from California who brought his daughter, dropped her off for first year orientation, and the night of orientation, the first night of orientation, he said to me, as soon as I stepped on this campus, I knew that this was a place that was going to respect my daughter's intellect. Thank you for that. And I remember the exchange student from Pakistan who wanted desperately to come back and get her degree from Agnes Scott, and she wrote me a letter and said, this place has changed my life, because now I know there are places in the world where women are fully and wholeheartedly respected. And even if I never get to come back, I will carry that for the rest of my life. Women's colleges encourage women to be leaders, and that's good for all of us. Now, there was a study that came out in the Harvard Business Review recently that supports this claim. It was researchers from Carnegie Mellon and MIT, and what they were actually trying to figure out is what makes teams smarter. Their hypothesis was that the higher the IQ of team members, the smarter the team would be. And guess what? They were wrong. No correlation. So then they started to look at where are their correlations? And they found the surprising finding, they said, that you add women to a team, and the team gets smarter. That's why I love what I do. I get up every day and I serve an institution that encourages young women to have the confidence to challenge the voices of gender bias in their own heads, and to go out into the world and to be those team members and those leaders who are making a difference. And here's what you can do to be a part of the women's equality revolution. When you hire, when you assess and evaluate people, make sure you are being vigilant about the voices of gender bias in your head and acting against it. When you talk to the feisty, smart young women in your life, encourage them to check out women's colleges as springboards for leadership and success. And please, please, don't ever ask me if Agnes Scott is still an all-girls school. Thank you.